One of my favorite things that the establishment unintentionally does would be revelation of the method. When they expose to you the cards that they're holding, and do so unintentionally, because realistically, many of the times, what you have to understand is when it comes to the fact of these people, they are not impressive. They're just evil and willing to do anything to climb the ladder for power, meaning it doesn't matter who they step on nor who has to bleed out beneath them. They will gladly do whatever is required to achieve that throne. And this is the big thing that needs to be realized because this understanding can be applied to many of the different things that we've seen within that of the Democratic political landscape as of the past 24 hours. Specifically, when you see Nancy Pelosi coming forward and announcing, well, this ain't happening in a most recent interview that she had, because it really shows you that what's going on here isn't the nature of Democratic politics as has been presented to you for so long. What you need to realize is when they talk about democracy, all they mean is their hegemony, their ability to control the levers of power to make sure that they're manipulating the scales, and also on top of that, controlling the information, which means they can bend the long arc of history to make sure they are always those who are seen as ever more benevolent. And that is the big thing to pay attention to here. This is how the media has operated for quite some time. You could take this all the way back to the Soviet Union with Walter Duranty working for the New York Times, sitting there telling you, well, you see, these people within the Soviet Union, they're not actually starving, they're just tightening their belts. I don't know if you're aware, but if a child has to tighten their belt while they're trying to grow and develop, it means that they're starving to death and they're not getting enough nutrition. But of course, does that matter to the journalist class? No, they'll gladly sit there and do whatever's necessary to toe the line to purport the narrative. And that is exactly what we saw with this most recent interview with Nancy Pelosi, as we see with so many of these different interviews with these upper class Democrat politicians. This is the thing that needs to be exposed, that the game is nothing more than that, a game, and at that, the machinations of the rules are controlled at every single corner. This is going to be a fascinating story to go ahead and dive into. I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to Sticks, X, and Hammer for making me aware of this. Thank you for going ahead and informing me on this topic. I saw a couple of articles go through and I was like, oh, that's fascinating. And then I saw how it was that Nancy Pelosi had phrased what she was saying. And then I watched the actual interview and I realized how much this exposed. So quick shout out to Sticks, X, and Hammer. Link in the description down below. You will be able to go find him. He is phenomenal at political analysis. He is someone who is staunchly in Trump's corner. I disagree with him on some of his takes on Donald Trump, but do I care about that? No, because Sticks' political analysis is phenomenal. So please go give him a follow, subscribe to him on YouTube, Rumble, wherever you can find him. Now let's go ahead and jump in. Alrighty, jumping in now. Here we see Nancy Pelosi reveals how she got Joe Biden out. This ain't happening. I've never been that impressed with this political operation, said Pelosi of Biden. Interesting that. So something I'd like to tackle there is that the same way that you felt when you were working with these people who were under that of Barack Obama's administration, because a large majority of the people that are working in Joe Biden's political operation, as Nancy Pelosi calls it, well, they were the people that were working under the Obama administration as well. So did you feel the same way then? Or is it that you have to abandon these people and cast them off into the dustbin of history so you can make sure that you can put in your next puppet? Just something to consider, of course. The fact that anyone would actually think something like that happens and that democratic politics isn't done so specifically by the will of the people, well, that's just ridiculous. Don't you know democracies are sacred and noble institution that must be protected? In fact, if you're someone who operates from the standards of many of the people within the government class, democracy and government itself has supplanted the hierarchical structure of what you value most, and thus it has now become your god. And if you need any examples of this, look no further than the absolute hysteria of so many people within power surrounding January 6th. Alrighty, now let's go ahead and jump in and see what we've got. Here we see California Rep. Nancy Pelosi, the silent operator who clutched the reins of the House and steered it for nearly a decade, broke her silence on pushing President Joe Biden to suspend his re-election campaign in a new interview with The New Yorker. That is something that I find so interesting, that now Nancy Pelosi is willing to come forward and say this. And honestly, what you'll realize is this is going to be effectively operating on a 2-week time scale, because as we have to ramp up the propaganda to consistently shift the narrative, They only have so little time to truly whip up their base to make sure they can get them behind whatever candidate required. So expect a wide scale of media shifts. And when I say media shifts, I mean narrative changes specifically and how they cover certain things. They will be changing up their rhetoric, and they'll do so intentionally, as we have seen so consistently, just like they were talking about for so long that Joe Biden, sharp as a tack, you see. Behind the scenes, he's absolutely on point. He couldn't be more impressive. He knows everything about finance when it comes to the fact of Bitcoin, monetary policy, the idea of what happens with inflation because of mass money printing, the fact of the Middle East and the kerfuffle that is popping off there, the ideas of what's happening to solve the war in Ukraine with Vladimir Putin. You see, he's truly more on top of it than you could possibly imagine. This was stuff that was being said literally the day of Joe Biden walking out on the stage to go debate Donald Trump, and then after he stepped off that stage, every single one of those people heel turned immediately because they got their NPC firmware update and they decided to shift along with the narrative. Alrighty, let's go ahead and jump back in. Pelosi told the New Yorker that she had never been that impressed with Biden's political operation, but earlier in that day, on the fateful June 27th, Pelosi admitted she was the one assuaging fears about Biden's competency. When I was with the members, they were like, "Oh, how's it going to be? Trump will be so awful," I said. "Don't worry about it. The Joe Biden of the State of the Union is going to show up. It's going to be great," Pelosi said. "I just didn't want him to be seen with that guy, and then that happened, and I think everybody was stunned. It was stunning." Like the New York Times editorial board, David Axelrod and the talking heads on MSNBC, and virtually every other person in Democratic circles, Pelosi knew Biden couldn't last after that performance. For weeks following Biden's decision to drop out, a quiet stream of reporting has pinned Pelosi as the king, or rather queenmaker, behind Biden's decision. Couple of things to touch on before we go ahead and move along. So here you see highlighted in yellow, Pelosi admitted she was the one assuaging fears about Biden's competency behind the scenes. Yeah, obviously, because you're one of the power players within the Democratic Party. And not only that, but the entirety of US politics. Don't get it twisted. This woman wields a lot of power, and she is very politically adept. Nancy Pelosi is no fool. I know right-wingers love to act like she's just some stupid wench, and which she is most certainly a witch. But the thing that we have to pay attention to is this woman is quite intelligent, and that's why she's been able to last within politics for so long and be a better investor than Warren Buffett. Here we see in green, the Joe Biden of the State of the Union is going to show up, is what Nancy Pelosi was telling people. And honestly, if that would have happened, that would have been interesting. Of course, not as interesting as Joe Biden effectively shitting his pants in front of the world. And I do not mean as we saw on D-Day when he was in France to go ahead and pay tribute to those people who died in World War II. And we saw him all bust out and hit that stance that a 3-year-old hits when they're about to crap their pants. And if anyone's going to state that, "Oh, that's ridiculous that you would say that. I can't believe you would even assert that is such the case." Have you ever raised children? Have you ever taken care of them, babysat them by any chance? Because anyone who's actually grown up with young kids and did so for a long time, they can tell you very clearly what that stance means and what Joe Biden's about to drop, and it's a deuce in his pants. Alrighty, moving on, here we see, in blue, I just didn't want him to be seen with that guy, and then that happened. That is the funniest thing to me, is how they reference Donald Trump, because they almost want him to be like Voldemort, he who shall not be named. It's genuinely ridiculous. He's basically Sauron in their eyes, quite literally. I say this with zero exaggeration. Meanwhile, they themselves are the ones who are quite literally serving the system with which Sauron has crafted, which is government. Anyways, unbelievable. Here we see now in purple, reporting has pinned Pelosi as the queenmaker behind the scenes. So here's the deal that I love about this. They talk about, well, Pelosi's the queenmaker, you see. Who could possibly be the kingmaker? Well, that very well may be Barack Obama, but not only that, you would have to realize that this also comes from the fact of the donor class, because they're the ones who have real power in the political landscape, and specifically Democratic politics. And that is exactly why when you see something such as this, you need to realize that the strings behind the curtain are getting pulled, and you should be expecting to see narrative shift and politicians dance like puppets, because oh my goodness, if you thought everything's been shifting fast as of late, just wait till we push even further headlong into that of the 2024 election cycle. It's going to get wild. And my friends, you better buckle up, because when it comes to many of the different fronts that we see, whether it be the border, economics, or possible war breaking out, it's most certainly going to get worse before it gets better, so you better prepare. But I promise you, in the end, it most certainly will get better, but we will take time to achieve that end. So now let's go ahead and jump in and see what else this article has for us. Here we see, Nancy has made clear that they could do this the easy way or the hard way. Don't you just love that? The easy way or the hard way. What is it that you think that means? I want you to go ahead and think on that for literally just a second. Maybe it's the fact of, okay, well, your son has these federal gun charges being pressed against him. What if we were to levy these at him consistently? We were to open up the explosive case that we have against you with Burisma and your family's entanglement with these companies, which is by all means illegal when you consider the fact of that is effectively foreign influence within the United States government and buying off politicians within the United States that influences foreign policy. On top of that, you also see that Joe Biden has a lot of things that he could possibly be hung out to dry for when you consider things like the 1994 crime bill and how it is that he was supposed to be this progressive hero in the current era versus Donald Trump. And if they were to go ahead and flip the script and change the narrative, they could just roll out new talking points and tar and feather him, destroying the legacy that they very well could build for him upon his exodus from the presidential landscape. Do we know how that's going to unfurl? No, but will it be interesting to see and how it does? Abso-fucking-lutely. And I say that as someone who quite literally despises presidential politics because it's usually never interesting in any way, shape, or form because you're dealing with person on the left who is doing the bidding of the military-industrial complex and then the person on the right who is doing the bidding of the military-industrial complex. So yeah. Anyways, moving on, here we see. A Democrat close to the situation told Politico on July 21st she gave them 3 weeks of the easy way. It was about to be the hard way. Outwardly, Pelosi did not say much in the interim. It's up to the president to decide if he's going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short, Pelosi told MSNBC program Morning Joe on July 10th, being her only public remarks. Now, nearly a month later, Pelosi told The New Yorker, I didn't plan to do that on Morning Joe. In fact, if I did, I probably would have worn a different suit or something because I didn't look too professional. She added, my concern was, this ain't happening and we have to make a decision for this to happen. The president has to make the decision for that to happen. Don't you just love the transparent bullshittery that they deliver to you and act like they're not just lying through their teeth? Here we see, highlighted in yellow, it's up to the president to decide if he's going to run, and the president has to make the decision for that to happen. No, he doesn't. Joe Biden hasn't even been running this administration probably for the entirety of his time within office. This man was quite literally a puppet on marionette strings, as I have said God knows how many times. Does anyone remember the Times article? Joe Biden, please, we just need your corporeal form. Hello? Does that not say it all for you? The fact that they're sitting there telling you, well, you see, the president has to make this decision if he's going to run. The president's the one who's going to make that decision if that's going to happen. No, he's not. That's gaslighting. The president doesn't actually make those decisions. JFK wanted to abolish the CIA and scatter it to the wind after blowing it to 1,000 pieces. But the only thing that happened to him was his fucking forehead getting blown out the back of his scalp and scattered to the wind in 1,000 pieces. But of course, don't you worry, the president most certainly is the one who wields that power. Absolutely fucking ridiculous. Here we see, Pelosi insisted, as she had done before in an interview with CBS Sunday Morning on August 4th, that she never called one person about Biden. Okay, let's just go ahead and shoot that fucking gimp horse in the mouth real quick. Here we see from CNN Politics, Obama and Pelosi privately expressed concerns over Biden. Here you see, clearly, she's lied through her teeth. Here you now see, Pelosi told colleagues she would favor open nomination process if Biden drops out. Is that so? Here we see Nancy Pelosi fundraising for Democrats barely mentions Joe Biden. So very clearly, it's not that you're not having conversations behind the scenes, which you very clearly are, so you're lying, but what you're also doing is lying by omission because you're avoiding mentioning Joe Biden, and in doing so, you're very clearly signaling that he's not going to be the nominee. It's so obvious how this works, but of course, they're never going to tell you the truth in that of the corporate press or that of the political class. They're going to lie to you endlessly and gaslight you whenever you discover the truth and tell you that you're fucking crazy. Here we see, I kept true to my word, she says. Any conversation I had, it was just going to be between me and him. I've never made one call, she told The New Yorker. Yeah, I'm certain. And here we can see from CBS Sunday Morning, I did not call one person, Speaker Nancy Pelosi says when she's talking with Leslie Stahl about her role in President Joe Biden's decision to drop out of the presidential race. And when we see drop out of the presidential race, what we really mean is an internal coup within the Democratic Party to install Kamala Harris, because Joe Biden is quite literally the emperor who has no clothes. So now let's go ahead and give it away to Nancy Pelosi talking to Leslie Stahl.
There have been reports that it was Nancy Pelosi who orchestrated a coordinated effort to squeeze President Biden to drop out. Please tell us what you told President Biden to persuade him to step aside.
Well, I've never shared any conversations with the President of the United States publicly, no.
It's said that he's furious at you. Is he?
Well, he knows that I love him very much.
I understand that you don't want to own this, but it is so well reported that you were the leader of a pressure campaign.
No, I wasn't a leader of any pressure party. Well, let me say things that I didn't do. I didn't call one person. I did not call one person. I could always say to him, I never called anybody.
Ah, yes, because if there was anyone you could trust in the political landscape, it's Nancy Pelosi. I guarantee you, she never had any phone calls behind the scenes surrounding the topic of Joe Biden and his ousting from the role of president for the 2024 election cycle. No, no. I can't believe you would even assert that. It's absolutely insane that she would even come forward and say this. Well, if she didn't have a phone call then, let's say maybe a couple of text messages, perhaps an email chain, maybe an in-person conversation or two, and of course, as we can most certainly guarantee, at minimum, a couple of phone calls, because you are someone with the upper echelon of the Democratic political elite, and because of that, you are most certainly going to be frantically running around like a cat with a bag over its head with no ability to actually grapple with reality, because you are freaking out of the nature of what has been presented directly in front of you, which is Joe Biden's cognitive failings. Now let's go ahead and get back to it. Here we see Pelosi said people were calling her saying there was a challenge there. She added, so there had to be a change in leadership of the campaign, or what would come next. Now that the dust has settled, Pelosi said she has not talked to Biden since his withdrawal on July 21st. Pelosi saying, I lose sleep on it, referring to her tattered relationship with Biden. I hope so, she replied when asked whether her relationship with Biden would continue. I pray so. I cry so. Does anyone actually believe that Nancy Pelosi, this soulless vassal for evil, this literal soulless, cold-blooded reptile, is sitting there crying over anything but the dwindling value of her pocketbook? No, of course not. She would gladly stab Joe Biden in the back. And here you can see she would also gladly denigrate him, which would very well paint the picture as to why it is that Joe Biden may not be wanting to speak to someone like Nancy Pelosi and has not been willing to present himself to the world, because he very well may be browbeaten into submission and demoralized beyond all belief. Here we see from Politico, Pelosi told Biden, you're dragging down Democrats. Here we now see from CNN, Pelosi privately told Biden polls show he cannot win and will take down the House. Biden responded with defensiveness. From CNN, Pelosi says she has not spoken to Biden since he dropped out of the race. And I wonder why he hasn't spoken to you. Maybe it's because he took nothing more than a knife in the back from you and has no desire to interact with you. I wonder. Here we see from CNN, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she still hasn't spoke to President Biden. He knows I love him. And in fact, he knows I love him so much that I was one person who was willing to drive a political blade into his back and remove him from the political landscape. Of course, Joe Biden being a frail old man who has no right to even be within presidential politics, but that doesn't change the fact of how it is perceived by him. But don't you worry, Nancy Pelosi, she's such a good person, and she thinks Joe Biden's just such an important figure in American politics, you see, that he needs to be memorialized on Mount Rushmore. Here we see from the New York Post, Pelosi says U.S. should add Biden to Mount Rushmore. Such a consequential president. Such an interesting turn of phrase there. Consequential. That's how Barack Obama also referenced Joe Biden. And when you look at the economic spiral that we are in, heading towards an inflationary recession, you look at the tragedy of the border, the possibility of wider war breaking out in the Middle East, and realistically, the entire world possibly goose-stepping us into World War III. Well, yes, Joe Biden most certainly has been a consequential president. Just like Nancy Pelosi is most certainly a consequential figure within Democrat politics, and that's why she was crucial controversial in ousting Joe Biden from the 2024 presidential race. I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you for watching. If you got this far, thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, and as usual, most importantly, my friends, tell someone you love them. Peace out.